We now would like to hear from Miss Brother Charles Santiago, was among the first leader, among the first organizations to call for the end of the military takeover in Myanmar, and to highlight APSR successes or strategies in pressuring ASEAN and the military government to end the takeover of the democratic government in Myanmar. May I call now on Mr. Santiago, please?
Thanks for the kind introduction. This is Charles Santiago, fellow friends and trade unionists. I bring you greetings of peace and solidarity from the ASEAN Parliamentarians for Human Rights. In the early days of the coup, there were hopes that ASEAN would step up, and show the leadership that we have been wanting to see from them for so long, I mean the ASEAN leadership. But this hasn't happened. In fact, it's been very disappointing, highly disappointing. ASEAN's response has been hampered both by its lack of leadership, internal divisions, as well as its founding principles of non-interference and consensus decision-making. In late April, ASEAN hosted the ASEAN Leaders Summit on Myanmar, where an invitation was extended to co-leader Min Aung Hlaing, who has now become the Prime Minister, the man who most responsible for the terror and violence currently taking place in Myanmar, but not to representatives of the National Unity Government, which includes MPs elected in the November 2020 elections. In fact, at the time, the ASEAN Parliamentarians for Human Rights lobbied with the ASEAN governments, including the various embassies in the region, and also the ASEAN trading partners, to include or to invite the National Unity Government for the meeting in Jakarta. This never materialized. At that meeting, ASEAN leaders and the Myanmar junta established a 5-point consensus, which called for an immediate cessation of violence, constructive dialogue among all parties, the appointment of a special envoy, humanitarian assistance, and a visit to Myanmar by a special envoy. Immediately after the meeting, Min Aung Hlaing, the general, poured scorn on this agreement, saying he would only give it careful consideration, but only when the situation returns to stability. Now, what this means, your guess is good as mine. But it's important to remember that stability to Min Aung Hlaing means suppressing all signs of opposition to his coup. One step of the consensus that has occurred is the appointment earlier this month of the Myanmar Special Envoy. However, not only did it take 4 months for the divided bloc to agree on a name, but ASEAN also granted Min Aung Hlaing an effective veto over the appointment. As a result, it had to settle on Brunei's second foreign minister, Irwan Yusof. I was involved in a dialogue last week with Foreign Minister Irwan Yusof on Myanmar. And I must say, I came out for the meeting, which was an hour and a half, very depressed. I can't divulge the discussions that took place, but I came out thinking, oh my God, the situation is going to get worse. The minister's appointment, Foreign Minister Irwan Yusof appointment, is problematic for several reasons. Firstly, as a representative of the ASEAN chair, he has led the bloc's ineffective response to the crisis, including pushing the military narrative that new elections could be held under their watch. This was not agreed to the 5-point consensus. This was never agreed, but he actually conceded to it when he visited Myanmar. It's also highly questionable how the minister of an absolute monarchy that does not abide by international human rights standards will manage to convince a murderous army to respect these principles. There's been other issues with ASEAN's response to the human rights catastrophe in Myanmar, which has emboldened the military by effectively granting them the legitimacy they desire. Since the coup, ASEAN has continued inviting junta representatives to its official meetings, but not held a single meeting with the NUG, which is Myanmar's only legitimate government. In fact, at the meeting with the foreign minister, I made the call 2-3 times. I said, please have a meeting with NUG. That's what constructive dialogue means, but there was no response to that. ASEAN also shamefully worked to water down the international community's efforts at the UN General Assembly to call for the prevention of arms sales to the Myanmar military. And just last week, the ASEAN Interparliamentary Assembly, or IPA, invited junta representatives to its 42nd Assembly, but ignored requests by the CRPH, literally giving a seat to the jailer of Myanmar MPs and the murderers of parliamentary democracy in the country. In contrast to the ineffective response from our region's leaders, civil society groups, parliamentarians, trade unions such as this, across the region have mobilized, try, and pressure officials into action. In fact, I would like to submit to you that the only way forward, is actually the civil society groups, parliamentarians, trade union groups, and so on, mobilizing in support of the NUG and the people of Myanmar. I think expecting the ASEAN governments to do is expecting too much. If I may, I'd like to talk a little about ASEAN Parliamentarians for Human Rights and our efforts towards the situation in Myanmar. On top of releasing public statements and op-eds, as well as organizing press conferences on a range of issues related to Myanmar crisis, including the COVID-19 pandemic and the escalation of violence in certain parts of the country, we have also led the way on establishing an international alliance of MPs working to advance Myanmar-related issues in their respective parliaments and countries. In fact, we have invited members of the cabinet of the NUG as well as the CRPH to speak to the members of parliament from all over the world on Myanmar. The International Parliamentarians Alliance for Myanmar, established in March, was established with a view to connect global lawmakers with Myanmar civil society and MPs to provide a forum for developing joint international and regional strategies and to serve as a consistent public voice for democracy and human rights for all in Myanmar. There is much more that can be done and that needs to be done. It has been 6 months since the coup, and as unions, civil society, and parliamentarians, we must continue our effort and ensure that ASEAN's disappointing response is not the end game. I especially urge parliamentarians across the world to use their position to advocate for one, the recognition of NUG and CRPH as the only legitimate entities that can claim to democratically represent the people of Myanmar. Number two, immediate independent humanitarian assistance, particularly amid COVID-19, that reaches all people in Myanmar. And number three, for a global coordinated sanctions regime to put in place against the junta's business interests. As members of parliament, there are many ways we can do it. We can hold official cross-party meetings with members of the CRPH and the NUG. We can question our governments on its actions and responses since the coup. And number three, we can support efforts by Myanmar civil society. And number four, use our positions to keep the situation of Myanmar and of their fellow Myanmar colleagues in the spotlight and in the media. As parliamentarians, we have a unique role to play when democracy is attacked. We are the guardians of our people's representation and voices. That is also why it would be extremely important for us to see the CRPH and the NUG is one, proactive in reaching out to global, regional, and national parliaments. We can help liaise, but it would be extremely useful to have an international regional liaison officer for the CRPH and NUG who can take the lead. Number two, it's important for us to hear from the different ethnic representatives of the NUG and from the ethnic MPs as well, to engage with them. In that sense, we would like to see a diverse representation of the NUG and CRPH. We need to continue to collaborate, strategically advocate together as one regional front, one more unified, united, and effective than ASEAN. I want to end on sending a final message to the people of Myanmar who have continued to show their deep desire for human rights and democracy. ASEAN may fail, but you, but we will not. Rest assured that parliamentarians, unions, and civil society groups across Southeast Asia will continue working tirelessly to pressure our leaders into action and demonstrate to the Myanmar people that we hear the calls you have been making for the last 6 months. Let me end by expressing my three-finger salute to all our friends who are gathered here, as well as to promote and push further the struggle of the people of Myanmar. Thank you very much.